Welcome back for part 2 of the PT331 SEC Air operator training. Now that I have my trays attached, the machine is plugged in from my power receptacle here into a standard 110 volt wall socket, preferably on a direct line straight into the socket and with surge protection. I'm ready to power on the machine. So I have two different power connections that I need to worry about here. One being underneath on the in-feed side, underneath my feed table, I have a standard power switch like you'd find on the bottom of a desktop computer. And then on the top of the machine, on the back-end side, I have my safety switch. And this will look a little bit different if you're in the US versus if you're in Canada. It'll either be a straight push and lift or a twist lock that's going to power on my machine. Okay, once that happens, you should see the screen come on and you will hear the machine cycle. So that's just the blades turning as they get power to make sure that everything is moving properly. If there are any issues, you'll be notified very, very quickly. It'll come up with an error on the machine if anything doesn't cycle properly, really just the crease die and your cutting knife. Okay, on the in-feed side of the machine, not too much else we need to worry about right now. Underneath is where my waste bin is, so we're going to keep that pushed up to the back. This came in and out as we were unpacking the machine. I've got storage for my optional dies. The crease die will ship inside the machine, but if you purchase the additional perforation die, you'll see that right here, which I can show you. So we move forward in our training. And then a couple other things on my feeder setup, nothing else underneath the machine. Okay? So when I'm setting up my machine for the first time, when I'm getting ready to run jobs, you should read this manual. Right, so it ships with the machine. It goes through unboxing, assembly, a lot of the things that we've covered in this video. The most important thing that you're going to see are the safety on page 3, so just as we get inside the machine, and then my specification chart on page 4 just after that. So this is something that's very, very necessary, not only for the operator of the machine to know as they're setting up their jobs, but vitally important for whoever's doing the design and file setup initially for the machine. So if I'm setting up my jobs, business cards, greeting cards, doesn't matter what it is, and I'm not adhering to the minimums and maximums of the machine, because there are some limitations when we're using these automated systems, then the machine's not going to be able to run it properly. Right? So this is something that you should copy, you should keep out, reach out to Graphic Wizard. We can send you electronic files as well. But there are a lot of things in here that are going to help you as you move along through the machine. We have our quality control checklist. This is coming from the factory. Just making sure that we've packed everything inside the machine. Adjustments. These are things that are made by my technical staff when we're making sure that the machine works properly. And then we have our training and installation checklist. And so when you receive the machine and you're going through these things for the first time, just go through and check off these boxes. If you see a no, or if you think anything isn't covered during my training here, I'm going to be checking this off as I go along, but just reach out if you need more information. Again, like I said, a lot of stuff is covered in the manual, so feel free to read those things as well. But we're going to go through and we're going to check these off for ourselves. We just want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with the machine, how it arrives, and we know if there's any missing parts as soon as possible so that we can correct those things for you. Okay, now that we have the housekeeping things out of the way, tuck these back inside the manual. Like I said, don't lose these. They are important. Okay, so read it if you're an operator. If you're doing the design file setup, you're going to want to look at, say, page 4 to make sure that everything that you're setting up is going to run properly through the 331 SEC Air. Now, once we've done those things, when I'm setting up my job for the first time, this is an air feeder, and I have a few different adjustments I can make on my feeding table. So the first one being side-to-side setup. I have my self-centering guides, and I'm just going to loosen these off and then move them up to the side of the paper so that they're close, they're touching, but they're not binding my sheet. And we don't want a lot of side-to-side movement because it is a center feed machine and it's not going to register again after it leaves this area. So keep it nice and tight. You'll notice that the non-operator side the left-hand side, if you're looking at the feeder from the outside of the machine, has a spring-loaded guide in here, so it's going to give it a little bit more flexibility. It can go relatively tight. Once you've done that, then I just tighten the tabs back down, and it's going to be ready to go. We have a number of guides and magnets that came with the machine. Those should all be unpacked. The shortest one we're going to use on the back end, and that's going to stop the sheets once my airflow comes on from pushing out the back end of the machine. So I'm always going to use these two side guides. Those are keeping it left to right aligned. And then one more magnetic guide at the back to make sure that my stock doesn't move backwards when the airflow comes on. Okay, the way my feeding belt works. Sorry, I'm going to try not to move you too much because I don't want to give everybody motion sickness here. But there's a 4-inch belt in the middle of the machine. I have fans that are creating airflow from the front to separate my sheets. And then I have suction on this belt here to lift up my top sheet and pull it into the slitter cutter greaser. Okay, so a couple of different adjustments that we need to make for that. One, airflow from the front. So when I turn this knob clockwise, it opens up air guides on the front of the machine. And I'm not going to get my camera in there, but if you lean down and look through the feeder this way, you'll see those slots open and close as you open and close the airflow knob here. Okay, so for heavier stock, if you're running 12, 14, 16 point, I'm going to keep that pretty much wide open. If you're running lighter weights, you're going to turn this back. Too much air will make those stocks flutter and it will have a hard time getting contact with my suction belt. Okay, so lighter weight stock, left. Heavier weight stocks, right. Next, beside this one, my feeding belt itself, like I said, the suction belt sits horizontal inside the machine. We can just see it from the front. And we want that to pull through one sheet at a time. So the second adjustment here, or a set of fingers, as you can see my hand demonstration here. And as I tighten that up, so turning it clockwise, it gets smaller. You can see there's a little diagram on there, and it makes that gap smaller. Okay? And then when I open it up, it makes that bigger. So just like the other one, turn clockwise, smaller for thinner stocks, and then more open for the bigger stocks to make sure I can pull 2 sheets through. So as a general rule, when I'm starting my feeder, right, when I'll press play and actually start up a job, I'm going to keep this tight to make sure almost no sheets can get through. If one sheet pulls through, then you're in a good spot. If it ever pulls doubles, you're going to tighten this up. And if you press play and you can't get a sheet through, then just slowly turn it until one sheet pulls through. And then you know that gap is only big enough for one sheet to make it through on the machine. Okay, so airflow and then my gap adjustment, those are things you're going to use. If you're using the same type of stocks all the time, you won't have to adjust them all that much. Because it's your machine now, feel free to draw on the stickers that we have on there, add sticky notes, masking tape, whatever's going to help you. If I use 2 different stocks inside my shop, I would have 2 different lines drawn on there with permanent marker so that I know quick turn to this line is where I need it set up for my 10-point C2S. And then this other line is what I need for my 16 point, right? So just make it easier for yourselves when you're switching back and forth if you are using the same stocks all the time. On my feeder itself, I've got this one small knob that only turns 5 to 10 degrees. It's not an error, and that's how it's supposed to move. And what this one is doing is if you put your hand underneath the machine, okay, making sure it's not running, but lift up, and there's a little plastic finger, and if you push it up, you can hear it click. Okay? So I'm doing it right now, and I can hear it click. My microphone's going to be canceling out the noise for you, but just reach under there and feel that. So what's happening is when my table comes up to the top, it will lift. This finger gets depressed, so it clicks when it touches a micro switch, and the pile stops raising, and it starts to feed my sheets through. So what this one will do is when I turn it left, counterclockwise, it makes that trigger a little bit sooner, and when I turn it up, it will raise a little bit higher. And so it's just shortening or making the gap a little bit bigger from where my stock is sitting inside my feeder to where you would want it to, so how close it is to the belt, sorry. So more space. If you're using higher airflow, a little bit more space will give the stock a little bit more space to lift up, and then the machine will be able to suck it up. If you notice as the machine's raising, it seems like there's a little bit of a gap and the suction belt is having a hard time lifting up your sheets. Well, then you're just going to turn that up a little bit and bring your sheets a little bit closer to the belt at the top, and it will pull through more consistently. And lastly, in terms of my feeder setup, I have a skew adjustment knob here. Because my table is running straight right now and it's set in the middle, I'm not going to make any adjustments here. But if you notice that your print is skewed, so if it's twisting left or right from front to back, my slitting blades and the cutting inside the machine is always going to be nice and square. So all we're going to do is turn this left and right, and that is swinging my whole feeding table left or right so that I can align my print to the sheet, right? So if I start off on the top and then my print comes a little bit closer on the bottom over here, then I want to turn my whole sheet that way a little bit so it starts off a little bit angled and then cuts down closer to this side as this feeds through the machine. Okay, so just a compensation for skew. If your prints are coming out aligned, if they're consistently skewed, reach out to your print provider, right? Service your machine, or do your alignment to make sure that it is going to come out straight. But we can make some adjustments there. So if you print off a full run and you notice everything's a little bit skewed or it looks a little bit crooked on the sheet, then I'm just going to come over to the back side here, make sure your guides are tight, but then compensate for your skew this way. So either swinging your table left or right on the back end.